Chicago, 1947. The city never slept, but it did know how to brood. Even in late spring, the streets were slick with last night's rain, and neon signs bled their colors into the puddles like veins of cheap liquor. Taxi horns barked at drunks stumbling out of jazz clubs, and the rattle of the elevated train clattered overhead like a restless ghost. Frank Callahan lit his last Lucky Strike and leaned against the brick wall outside his office on Wabash Avenue, watching the smoke curl into the night. The private detective business wasn't booming, not for men like him. The war was over, but in Chicago, a man still fought every day. Against the bottle, against his debts, against the outfit that seemed to own half the city. He was about to head upstairs when the car pulled up, black Packard, polished until it caught the neon-like glass. A driver in a dark cap stepped out, then opened the rear door. She emerged slowly, like she had all the time in the world. Eleanor Whitmore. He didn't need an introduction. Her husband's face had been in the papers just 3 days ago. Businessman found dead in office, the Tribune headline had read. Suicide, they said. Everyone believed it. Everyone but her, apparently. She wore a black dress that fit her like smoke fits a room, and a small veil shadowed her eyes. Still, Frank saw the steel in them. This wasn't a grieving widow. This was a woman with unfinished business.
Mr. Callahan?
That's the name on the door, and you're Mrs. Whitmore.
I need your help.
Inside his office, she wasted no time. The smell of her perfume cut through the dust and stale tobacco. She sat straight-backed in the chair across from his desk, hands folded like a woman giving testimony.
They say my husband took his own life. They're wrong. Harold wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a coward. He would never end things that way.
Men surprise their wives more often than you'd think.
No, someone killed him, and I want you to prove it.
What makes you so sure?
She hesitated, then slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Harold Whitmore at his office desk, the crime scene staged neatly, revolver in his right hand.
My husband was left-handed, Mr. Callahan.
Frank whistled low. That detail hadn't made the papers. Maybe it had been ignored. Maybe it had been buried. Either way, it smelled wrong.
And Harold had enemies. Business rivals, union bosses, men you don't cross unless you've grown tired of breathing. But the police won't dig into any of that. They've already closed the case.
You understand what you're asking? If the outfit's tied up in this, I poke my nose too deep, I might not keep it. And you...
I'm not asking you to keep me safe, Mr. Callahan. I'm asking you to keep me honest. My husband deserves the truth.
The room went quiet, save for the rain tapping against the window. Frank thought of the rent due, the empty bottle in his drawer, the way the city chewed up men who asked too many questions. But he also thought of Harold Whitmore's photo, the gun in the wrong hand, the neat staging. Suicide didn't look that clean.
All right, Mrs. Whitmore. Let's go find your husband's killer.
The Whitmore building sat at the edge of the riverfront, a tall gray stone box with windows like dead eyes. The city had a way of smothering the truth under brick and smoke, but Frank Callahan had learned to dig where the stink was worst, and nothing stank like the docks. It was late afternoon when he pushed through the glass doors of Whitmore and Company Shipping. The lobby smelled of ink, old varnish, and desperation.
Mr. Whitmore's passed. Company business is being handled by Mr. Doyle now.
And Mr. Doyle's the man I want.
Doyle's office was paneled in dark oak, heavy with the scent of cigars. The man himself was all polish, tailored suit, diamond cufflinks, hair slicked so tight it looked painted on. He greeted Frank with a salesman's charm that never reached his eyes.
Detective Callahan, isn't it? Heard you left the force. Shame. You had a reputation. What brings you sniffing around my shop?
Whitmore. His widow doesn't buy the suicide story. Neither do I.
Terrible thing. Harold was under a lot of pressure. Business, debts, personal matters. Sometimes a man folds.
Frank studied him. Doyle was too smooth, too rehearsed. The kind of man who could order a killing over lunch and still have dessert.
Funny thing, suicide notes don't usually come typed, or staged with the gun in the wrong hand.
That got Doyle's attention. For a flicker, his eyes hardened. Then he chuckled, a dry, hollow sound.
You ought to be careful, Callahan. Digging in the dirt long enough, you'll only bury yourself.
Frank left with no answers, just more smoke in his lungs. The city was good at that, feeding you shadows, starving you of the truth. He headed down toward the riverfront, where the air smelled of diesel and fish guts. That's when it happened. The alley behind the warehouse was narrow, slick with rainwater and trash. Frank had a bad habit of taking shortcuts, and bad habits get a man noticed. Two shapes peeled out of the shadows. Big, broad-shouldered, the kind of muscle you didn't hire to move crates. One of them carried a sap. The other cracked his knuckles loud enough to echo.
Evening, Callahan. Mr. Doyle says you're asking questions. He don't like that.
Funny, neither do I.
The sap came down fast. Frank ducked, caught the second man's fist in his gut, and swung blind. The fight was short and ugly. Fists, boots, and the taste of blood in his mouth. He dropped one of them with a knee to the groin, but the other slammed him against the wall, stars bursting behind his eyes.
You don't get it, Seamus. Case is closed. You keep poking, you won't be walking.
The sap cracked against his ribs one last time before they left him slumped in the trash, coughing red into the gutter. Frank wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, forced himself to stand. The pain in his ribs told him everything he needed. Doyle was hiding something. Eleanor Whitmore hadn't been wrong. Her husband's death wasn't suicide. And now Frank knew he wasn't just chasing shadows. He was hunting men who didn't mind killing twice. The Blue Orchid wasn't the kind of place you found by accident. Tucked down a side street off Clark, it hid behind a frosted glass door and a bouncer built like a bank vault. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, bourbon, and the low hum of a saxophone that bled like a confession into the night. Frank Callahan eased onto a bar stool, ribs aching from the alley beating. The bartender slid him a rye without being asked. Places like this always knew who walked in and why. The crowd was smoke and shadows, mob men with fat wallets, girls with thin dresses, city officials who swore they'd never been there. But the room quieted when she walked on stage. She wore red silk that clung like it had secrets to tell, and when the spotlight hit her, the rest of the world went dark. Veronica Lake, though Frank doubted that was the name on her birth certificate, sang in a voice that curled around you like cigarette smoke, sweet and lethal at the same time. Frank watched her the way a drowning man watches the shore. After the set, he caught her at the edge of the stage, slipping on a fur stole. Up close, her eyes were sharper than the diamonds she didn't wear.
You're new. New faces don't last long around here.
Neither do old ones. Name's Callahan. I'm asking about Harold Whitmore.
At that, the smile flickered. Just a second, but enough.
You don't waste time.
Neither does a bullet.
She glanced toward the back of the club where two mob gorillas nursed drinks and watched the room like hawks.
Harold was playing both sides, skimming off the docks, cutting deals he wasn't supposed to. Men like Doyle don't forgive that, and they don't let it slide.
So Doyle had him silenced?
I didn't say that, but I'll say this. Harold wasn't the first to vanish, and he won't be the last. Because I like a man who doesn't scare easy, but you should, Callahan. Around here, curiosity doesn't kill the cat, it kills the fool who feeds it.
And just like that, she was gone, swallowed by the curtain and the smoke. Frank sat there a long time, the weight of her warning heavy in his gut. Harold Whitmore hadn't been a victim of despair. He'd been a man who thought he could outwit the outfit, a man who lost. And now Frank had to decide whether he was chasing justice or digging his own grave. The Whitmore offices had been sealed up tight since Harold's death, but locks in Chicago were just invitations written in brass. Frank waited until midnight, when the street was empty, but for a stray drunk singing to the lamppost. He slipped a pick into the keyhole, listened for the click, and pushed the door open. Inside, the building breathed like a tomb, dark, silent, heavy with the scent of dust and ink. His footsteps echoed down the hall as he made his way to Harold Whitmore's office. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. Men who kill themselves don't tidy up first. On the desk sat a stack of ledgers, neat as church pews. Frank flipped one open, the pages filled with columns of numbers that didn't add up. Hidden among them were marks, kickbacks, payouts, coded notes that reeked of the outfit. Whitmore had been documenting every dollar skimmed through the docks, and from the look of it, Doyle's name was all over the margins. Frank whistled low. If Whitmore had gone to the feds with this, he wouldn't have lived to hand over the first page.
Find what you're looking for, Mr. Callahan.
The voice froze him, smooth, steady, with a hint of fear buried deep. He turned to see Eleanor Whitmore standing in the doorway, wrapped in a dark coat, her face pale in the moonlight spilling through the blinds.
You shouldn't be here.
Neither should you, but we both are. I knew Harold was in over his head, but I didn't know how far. He was planning to go to the government, wasn't he?
Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was all over the pages.
They killed him for this, didn't they?
Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy, purposeful. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Frank shoved her behind the desk just as the office door burst open. 2 thugs stepped in, the same ones who'd worked him over in the alley. Behind them came Doyle, cigar clenched between his teeth, smiling like a shark.
Well, like moths to a flame. You should have stayed retired, Callahan.
Frank's hand twitched toward his gun, but Doyle shook his head.
Don't bother. My boys have itchy fingers.
Doyle crossed the room, plucked a ledger off the desk, flipped through it with disdain.
These numbers don't leave this building. Harold forgot the rules. That's why he's 6 feet under. And that's why you're about to join him.
The thugs moved in, fists ready, guns gleaming under the weak light. Frank felt the walls closing in, smoke curling tighter around him. He'd found the truth, but truth in Chicago had a nasty habit of getting men killed. The Blue Orchid was louder than usual that night, laughter and brass horns spilling through the smoke like a storm about to break. Frank Callahan sat at a corner table, a glass of rye in front of him, though he hadn't touched it. Across from him lay the ledgers, Harold Whitmore's life's work and death warrant wrapped in leather binding. Doyle arrived late, striding in with his 2 shadows. He carried himself like the city was his, and maybe it was. The crowd parted for him without a word, eyes averted. Veronica Lake sang on stage, her voice sultry and sharp as broken glass, though her eyes flicked toward Frank just once. A warning, a plea, maybe both.
I don't know whether to admire your guts or your stupidity. Those books belong to me.
Funny. Harold Whitmore thought they belonged to the feds.
The smile vanished. Doyle's hand tapped the table like a drumbeat. One of his guerrillas reached inside his coat, but Frank laid his .38 on the table first, the steel glinting in the neon glow.
Here's how it works. I walk out with these ledgers, hand them over to a man I trust at the bureau. You walk out with your skin intact. Or, you try to take them and we redecorate this club with your brains.
The tension cut the air sharper than glass. Then the first guerrilla lunged. The gunfire came fast, deafening, drowning out the saxophones and screams. Glass shattered, tables overturned, the crowd stampeded for the exits. Frank dropped one thug with a shot to the chest, but the other clipped him across the jaw, sending the room spinning. It might have ended there if not for Veronica. She stepped from the stage, pistol in hand, her red dress glowing like a flame in the chaos.
You? You'd sell me out for this washed-up cop?
I'd sell you out just to breathe clean air again.
For a moment, the 3 of them stood frozen, Frank bleeding, Doyle seething, Veronica with her finger trembling on the trigger. Then Doyle went for his gun. The shot rang out. Not Frank's, not Doyle's, Veronica's. Doyle collapsed across the table, cigar still clamped between his teeth, smoke rising from his suit. The room went silent but for the hiss of the neon. Veronica lowered the pistol, her hands shaking now that it was done.
You'd better go, before the whole outfit comes down on this place.
Frank gathered the ledgers, tucking them against his chest. He paused, meeting her eyes one last time.
You've just painted a target on your back.
I've been living with one for years.
By dawn, Frank was back in his office, rain streaking the windows, the city humming its restless tune. The ledger sat on his desk, ready for the bureau. It wouldn't save Chicago. The outfit would bury the story, bribe the judges, buy the cops. But Harold Whitmore's death wouldn't vanish into smoke. Not this time. Finally, he stubbed out his cigarette and picked up his hat. Frank lit a cigarette, poured the rye he'd left untouched at the Orchid, and raised it in a quiet toast to the dead. Justice wasn't clean in Chicago, but tonight it was enough.